So, hello and welcome to chocolate lovers of all flavors, no matter where you might be tuning in this today from around the world. My name is Clay Gordon. This is the Chocolate Life Live, and my guest today is Sam Giha. I've known Sam for quite some time. He's one of the founders of Cacaosuyo in Peru. He's got a really interesting story leading up to how he decided to get into the world of chocolate. I think many of us in the world of chocolate to have interesting stories about what our lives were before chocolate. But then he's also embarked on a really, really interesting job. He's been asked to become a part of a committee at the ICCO to help promote cocoa. And so with that, we'll talk with Sam after we come back from the intro. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Chocolate Life Live. Today, I'm joined by my good friend, Sam Giha, who's calling in from Lima, Peru. And it looks like you're in your office, in your factory. How are you today, Sam?
How are you, Clay? Hello, everybody. Well, I am in my office. I work in person at the factory.
Well, I'm very, very glad to hear it. Now, one of the things that I wrote in my introduction on the post on the Chocolate Life is that I was in Lima for the first time for the Salon del Cacao y Chocolate in 2013. And I remember, meeting, Lucia Montoya of Chatel and a bunch of other people in 2013. So was Cacaosuyo in business in 2013? And I just don't remember that you were there. Or would you have started the business? And so when I was there in 2014, that would have been, I think, the first time when we might have met each other.
I remember perfectly, actually.
Okay.
We had, our company had been set up in 2012. And at that show, it was at the Sheraton. And yes. I spoke to you briefly, and you mentioned about, FBM and the projects you were doing. And we went out and we bought some of the machines. One that, in a way, is inspired by your name. So we actually, it did exist, but we weren't at the show as a chocolate company yet. Gotcha. Because we invested more in knowledge, invested in learning the first year and a half of our existence. So we launched our brand in 2013, but it was in September. So yeah, we existed. We were there. We had a chat, and I remember perfectly.
Well, I apologize for not remembering perfectly. I am of an age, and some details just seem to get lost in the mists of time.
Well, you were in front of like hundreds of new people, and I met one big redhead. Right. That was it.
Slightly smaller these days. I'm happy to be able to say. Before we jump into getting into a little bit of the backstory about Cacaosuyo, what I want to do is I want to mention people that if you're watching live, whether on LinkedIn or YouTube and Facebook, you can go into the chat. You can put some comments or questions. We'll be happy to get those comments and questions up on the screen in front of Sam. And also let us know where you're calling in from. So we have guests from around the world who are watching this. If you don't have a question, just let us know where you are in the world. And, Sam, first thing, we've got a hi from Vivi, who right, good to hear. You have such an interesting guest. Yes, thank you very much. And that Samuel is also connecting from, I believe, Ghana. So thank you all for reaching out. So You came to chocolate as an adult. You weren't always interested in chocolate. You are an American. You have Middle Eastern background, which we might guess from the name. But I don't think you went to school for chocolate. What were you doing in the United States before chocolate? How did you decide to go to Peru, and why chocolate?
Well, first of all, I was always involved in chocolate. That was my favorite thing when I moved to the States at a very early age. My dad was a medical doctor in the United States, and that's why I speak English with an American accent. And I always used to ask anybody who came from Peru to visit us to bring me chocolate. So I was a chocolate fan from the beginning. I've always been. I've seen that evolve also. Those chocolate flavors that I loved when I was a kid have evolved differently, not only from my knowledge, but just I think those flavors changed as prices or as the big companies tried to save some money and development of chocolate. So it kind of stuck in my head. But yeah, I was born in Peru, but I grew up in the United States. I went to school, I went to college in the States. When I finished college, I went to Peru. I came back to Peru, and I've done a lot of different things. And you've seen me, and please don't look for it.
I've seen you perform, yes.
But yeah, I still sing for fun. But that was part of so many things I've done, because in the States I've done many things, from selling homes and from selling insurance and door to door, and I've done everything. So when I came to Peru, I started in textiles, and textiles went really well for me. And I decided I wanted to invest in something else. My background is economics, and what we learned basically to think in economics is, one thing leads to another. I mean, there's an action, there's a reaction to things that happen in the market, and I was seeing that Peru was growing less and less cotton, which was our main ingredient for the products I used to export. So it was less and less, but I was seeing more and more cacao. So I said, once I'm done with these big guys, I'm doing a lot of exports. If I lose the big clients to China or whatever, I'm gonna just do something else. And I had already started investing in an idea of investing in chocolate. So I made the transition as soon as I lost my biggest clients to foreigners. Like, I had working with Saks or Nordstrom's and companies like that. I said, I'm just gonna go all into cacao, and that's where I am, all in cacao.
So when would that have been?
It started basically in 2012 is when I made my investment. I had been looking at it 2 years before. I had been going to salons de cacao looking for machinery. I didn't know where to start, so I was looking for machinery. But once I learned a little bit, I said, we're not buying machinery. We're going to learn about this a little more. So I actually hired an expert from Venezuela to teach us about cacao. Let's find out about, learn about our main ingredient first, and then we'll start making chocolate. So it took me a year and a half to have school, learn to taste cacao, learn to taste chocolate, and do a lot of these things that figure out what would make our chocolate better, what would make us be the best chocolate possible with Peruvian cacao. That was basically our idea. So that's why we started with investing in knowledge first. And that's where we learned about post-harvest and everything else we needed to do. That's why Cacaosuyo is very much involved in that part of the process. We know we have amazing genetics, and that's what we attribute our success to, is basically the amazing cacao we have in Peru. But what we learned, after the harvest or during the harvest ripe, healthy fruit, and take care of everything so that it shows in the chocolate and not the hands of what we do. Not important, necessarily important, the roast and everything else that we do in the processing. It's the cacao that we need to take care of first. And that's what we learned.
Gotcha. So if I can, you mentioned the Salon del Cacao y Chocolate. And it's where we met. But one of the things that I think that people who may not be aware of the situation down in Peru is that the Salon was very deliberately set up. That I believe it was people from Prom Peru and Minagri who went to the organizers of the Salon, the Salon in Paris. And said, we have, the United States government through USAID has invested a lot of money in developing the cocoa supply, what we're looking to do is we're looking to take coca farmers and giving them an alternative crop to cocoa. But they hadn't really thought about developing the market for it. And so that's one of the reasons why the Salon in Paris was founded, or the Salon in Lima was founded, to help, simultaneously, brilliant idea, bringing people in from outside the country who could help with local growers and chocolate makers, producers and chocolate makers, to give them feedback on their product, and then go back outside of Peru and say, listen, Peru is doing such wonderful things, and at the same time growing national pride in the local industry. So Peruvians who hadn't really thought about chocolate, perhaps in a gourmet sense, all of a sudden had that sensibility to it. Is my misunderstanding wrong? Is there more to this story about how Peru, just really jumped into the global consciousness in 2013, 2014? That's my sense.
Well, there's the background that now we know there's been studies done. Juan Carlos Sotomayor with the Mars group investigation invested in finding out about cacao, and the studies have shown that the center of genetic origin of cacao is Peru. We have more genetic clusters than any other country in the world, and that's how they define it scientifically, as we have it with the potato and other things. So we had this. Even though we were a genetic origin of cacao, Peru, probably 20 years ago or less, probably 15 years ago, was not even on the cacao producing map. Okay, we can check ICCO and everything. Peru was not part of it. Peru was not a producing country. It was very tiny, and actually it comes into being into a producing country thanks to the work with the government and the USAID. So USAID pours a lot of help into replacing coca leaf for cacao. So all of a sudden we hear places like San Martin, which is the biggest growing area now, is all like brand new plantations of cacao that was built to grow a lot of volume and give the farmers a possibility of having income. There were other crops like palm oil plantations and palm hearts and that kind of stuff in the area. But basically a lot of it was cacao. Lawrence started with the USAID at that time, pushed it very much. And I think you probably met him.
I have.
He's so he's great, really fun guy. And so he actually pushed a lot as the beginning of this. Let's replace crops with cacao. So obviously, one of the ideas behind it is if we're going to change crop from coca leaf to cacao or whatever, we have to give the farmers a possibility to sell their products. So Peru had to promote that and also receive a lot of help, and still does, from USAID. We have Alianza Cacao helped being also financed by USAID, that promotes fine cacao being planted in different parts of the country. So I think the backstory to add is that we weren't on the map. Now we're on the map. Now we're a producer of cacao that's recognized, and we're an active partner in the world of cacao.
So before I get into the next questions, what I do want to recognize is the people who are in the room who've thrown things up on the chat, which you're not seeing, Sam. But I also want to say, if you're watching live on YouTube, please click the like button, or on Facebook or LinkedIn, please do that. But we've got a couple of things going on. We have Gene Thompson from Seattle, who's connected. Gene, thank you very much for joining us today. I don't know if you know Clive Martyr from the UK, but he's asking, can he get hold of your bars through Cocoa Runners in the UK, or are there any other UK stockists?
Cocoa Runners is fine.
Cocoa Runners,
have all of them, but they do have Cacao.
Okay, great. And I want to let you know that if you're on LinkedIn, you may be able to send messages to each other on LinkedIn, but I can't send you messages from here to LinkedIn. So I don't respond. If I respond, I can get you to YouTube and to Facebook. For some reason, I can't get to LinkedIn. I don't know who Bean to Bar is. I'm sorry. But somebody says, it's nice to hear your voice again, Sam. Oh, no. And this is Balu from Cocoa Town. Now we know. So just wanted to say hello and thank you. Thank you for checking in. So, Sam, what I want to do is jump in. and let people know this is the cacaosuyo.pe website. You can go there. If your Spanish is good, you can read it. You'll look at, here is a list of the products which they have available. And I notice you have 3 different regions of here. I noticed you have 4 single origin bars, but 2 of them appear to be from Cusco. Oh, that would make sense. There's one on top of each other. What do I know? So, I know Piura is up north. It's both a city. It's also the name of a state. It's right next to the southern Ecuadorian border. And as you head east, you get to the town of Chulucanas, which is where I sort of remember most of the cocoa and Piura being grown. But also that's sort of the gateway into Amazonas state, as I recall, from there. And so Amazonas is a huge state. I think Iquitos is in that area. And Cusco. So of all the places in Peru, why these 3 origins? What about them is specifically interesting? And, is your involvement as a buyer, or you're going in there and you're working with farmers to work on selection and post-harvest processing and all that kind of stuff? So how are you, or how is Cacaosuyo supporting the local industry?
Well, supporting. Well, this gives me a chance to shout out to Gene as well, because we are not very good at promoting, and it gives me a chance to tell a little bit what we do. When you just showed pictures of our old packaging, which tells we're not good at doing things or talking about things on the internet. But one of the things you just asked specifically, what are we doing to promote? Well, actually, with the help of Seattle Chocolate Company, that Gene is CEO of, we're just putting in a brand new post-harvest facility in Vrime for a co-op there, and that's kind of stuff we've been doing in the past. We've helped other farmers in Piura and Amazonas set up post-harvest facilities. This is a direct investment. It's a donation to them. It's very generous of Seattle Chocolate Company, and actually they've been in the area. They know the quality of cacao that is there, and they're very much involved with us. There's a lot more to the story between Cacaosuyo and Seattle Chocolate Company, of course, that I'm not getting into right now. But this collaboration to help the small farmers improve greatly, and their income comes by way of improving the quality of cacao, and the post-harvest facility is the first step. So thank you, Gene, and letting you all know that this is part of what we do as Cacaosuyo, because we learned, and we go back to the first part of your question, is that why Piura? We learned from the beginning, like I said, to first of all invest in knowledge. And if we wanted to know what good cacao was, we had to talk to people who knew how to identify, who knew how to taste it. And there was a big thing going on about Piura white cacao. So Piura white cacao is an excellent, obviously it's delicious, it's amazing. I can't say the best of anything, because I love chunchos and I love Amazonas and I love Venezuelan cacao. And there's great cacaos in many places, but it's different and it's special. It has given us our first World International Chocolate Awards gold for our Piura milk. So, I mean, it's obviously, we found it was right, but we learned there that post-harvest was the most important. We had the genetics, but how do you go from having a good pod, ripe and healthy pod, to good dry cacao? It's all in the quality of the cacao. That's what we learned. So we are present in Amazonas, Cusco, and Piura, which are the 3 regions we most work with. But now we will be introducing what we find in Vrime. It's an amazing cacao. It's a lot of native cacaos there, very little hybrid. So taking advantage of this, and we'll be working with that this year.
So my geography of Peru is reasonable. I've visited there 5 or 6 different times and traveled around. But most of my travels have been in San Martin and Ucayali and Huánuco. And I know where Marañón is and places like that, and obviously Cusco. But where is Vrime? I'm aware of the name, but I can't place it geographically, just so that people who may have some knowledge of the geography of Peru can locate it on a map.
Okay, so it's straight from Lima east, goes over the mountains, and we're in the jungle. That's so it's east. So it's by car about 8-hour drive, 8.5-hour drive by car. Bus will take about 10 hours.
Gotcha. So, I think of Tarapoto as being sort of northeast of, so, again, this may be completely irrelevant in terms of the geography, but, I find just having this awareness about where things are spread is helpful to me. But I think it's also important that you said, the difference between nativos and hybrids. One of the things that people may not understand is that most of the cocoa that was introduced into production through the efforts of USAID, Alianza Cacao Peru, TechnoServe, an NGO, was actually hybrids of one sort or another. So there's a lot of CCN51, which came in from Ecuador, but we find things ICS, the Imperial College Selection, out of Trinidad, and THS, so Trinidad Standard Hybrids. I've seen a lot of those in gene banks throughout the country. Is there undiscovered cocoa out in Vribe? Do we know if there are new varieties? Have you seen those kinds of things?
Absolutely. I'm absolutely positive. And Everett Thomas of Biodiversity International his theory is actually that the center of all the fine cacao is actually in Cusco. If you go to Cusco, when they talk about chuncho, it's not one cacao. Chunchos are the cacaos that are in that Quillabamba valley, basically. And we're talking about, you're going to find tiny, small cacao seeds that are black or black looking. So dark, they're black. So, nobody's done much with that because it's very small production. It's very tiny. But there's a lot of cacaos like that. There are some white ones. There are a lot of different varieties in Cusco. We choose 3 to make what we call our chuncho, right? There's so many, and there's a lot that haven't been discovered. In 2012, we sent 250 genetic samples to USDA for sampling as part of these studies. So we've been involved with that, and we know that there's a lot of different genetic material out there still to be discovered, promoted, or utilized.
So for people who may not have traveled someplace and actually seen cacao silvestre or wild cacao, I had the great opportunity to be at the Hacienda Tranquilidad, which is at the Brazilian border. And it's the cacao which was introduced as part of the first wild cocoa and the chocolate that was produced by Falkland. And I know the Cru Sauvage. So I know that, there are some challenges. Number one is, when we think about hybrid cocoa, one of the things they've done is they said, we want big beans. We want big seeds because number one, is they're easier to process. And number two, there's a higher ratio of seed to shell. But if you look at these wild cocos, and by wild, we mean they're not farmed, they are harvested. They may have actually been deliberately planted hundreds of years ago, but gone feral, so nobody is tending them. But many of these pods are small enough so that the entire pod will fit in the palm of your hand, right? They're really, really tiny. And if you look inside the seeds, they're just incredibly small seeds. So you'll have 160 per kilo, right? Or 160 per 100 grams. Which really tiny seeds, but often some of the most delicious pulp. And sometimes just quite a bit of it. So just asking the question, you've got the chuncho, these 3 different varieties. Are you using the small pods and the small seeds, and do they represent some really interesting challenges in terms of production?
Well, yeah, and some. Actually, you have a picture in your gallery with a lot of yellow pods. Those are all chunchos. So if you put that up, you can see that. One of the characteristics of the chuncho pods are they're all yellow.
These ones here.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're all yellow ish anyway. And there's a very tiny one. right there. You can see in the middle of another one. So that could probably be what they call eggshell or cáscara de huevo. So the eggshell one is, it's crazy. I mean, you think the flavors have to be different if they're so different, you know, sometimes in color, sometimes in size and shape. So the eggshell one is called that because you can actually, you know, between my fingers, I can pop that open, and you can't do that normally with any pod.
So it's a very, very thin.
It's thinner. It's much thinner than the rest. Maybe I have pretty strong hands, but I can pop that open, and I couldn't do it to any other pod. So it's you know, it's you know, tells you that there's something different to that cacao, and obviously you taste the different you know, mucilage, you know, the fruit, and it's they're all different. So we use cáscara de huevo is one of the ones we use because that's been there native, and there's quite a bit of it. I mean, they're not all that small. That's one of the smallest ones you'll see. But definitely they're smaller. And we use another one called pamuco, another one called señorita, which is lady, like it's kind of more like a lady finger, so it's thinner and longer. So yeah, they're different. Those are the ones that we use, but there are many different ones, and there are some that, you know, there's cross-pollination as well in different areas, you know that. But, you know, we try to choose in farms that we can find them more pure.
Gotcha. So for people who are checking in, if you're watching or participating on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, you can go into the comments and send us questions. And there are a couple I want to get to, and also let us know where you're connecting in from. This is actually TheChocolateLife.com. This is the page which is dedicated to Day to Day's live stream. And so if you go to TheChocolateLife.com now or at any point afterwards, what you'll do is you'll find information, including the link to the website. You'll find images, all of the images that Sam has sent me. I know that Vivi has sent me some other resources. I will look to include, for example, embed the link to your Instagram account so that people can see images from the Instagram account. I will do that. I've also embedded a video which is on cacaosuyo.pe, which talks about the history of the company, some of the things you're doing. It is in Spanish with English subtitles, just to let everyone know. So this is the website, the post for today's live stream, and I will be updating it with other links that, you know, Sam mentions, and, you know, other comments and things that come in during the course of the hour. We have a question from Sebastian, Sam, who asks, in terms of genetic complexity and variability, as well as old cacao varieties. So we have to define what ancient means in that respect. Where is still more to discover in the genetic center of Cusco, so in Vrime, if that question, you know, makes sense. Do we think that the interesting, you know, is the Cusco Valley explored out? Do we think we've, you know what it is that we know there, and so attention is going to be in Vrime, or is there still, you know, more to learn from both of these places?
Yeah, I believe there's more to learn, definitely. In the Vrime, you're not going to find that many, but there are two that are being talked about a lot now. It's one is Vrime 19 and one is 15. That's the code names. We know the 99. Sorry, 99 is what they also called the goose. It has a reason why they call it goose, but it's actually particularly interesting tree. It's different. You can tell it's different. It's there's a lot of different branches going all over the place. You have to control it, but it produces a excellent cacao, and that's being propagated because what's interesting in that area is that CCN 51, which has been grown a lot in the San Martin area, and we consider bulk cacao, doesn't prosper very well because of the boring worm. For some reason, it gets into the seeds and it ruins the cacao, but not so on the native cacaos of the area. So that's a nice area, I think, for native cacao. That's why we're exploring that more. But as far as the question goes, there are probably many more varieties in Cusco area. And Everett Thomas of Biodiversity International is studying that a lot.
Gotcha. And Lauren, I don't know if you've been here from the very beginning, but your name was mentioned earlier fondly by both Sam and I remember certainly our meeting in Lima in 2013 at the show at the Salon there for the first time. So thanks for joining in and let us know that you're watching. So Keith, who's a contributor to The Chocolate Life, who's also a regular visitor here and watcher and participant in these live streams, a big rave for the Cusco 80% bar. Amazed at its sweetness, given it's a true 80%, no added cocoa butter. Label says it's due to naturally sweeter varieties. So, I mean, it has a higher level of naturally occurring carbohydrates which get converted to sugar during the processing part of it. I mean, I suppose that's one way to think about it.
Yeah, one other way is basically it's not bitter, so it becomes sweeter. Okay. Doesn't compete with the bitterness, and it actually a cacao. See, it's a very small cacao in general, but it has more cocoa butter content than any other cacao we find here. So we might find somewhere between maybe a pure cacao that might have 45% cocoa butter in the bean, and this will have up to 60% cocoa butter in the bean.
Oh wow, that's very high.
So when you have this, you'd be surprised that a Chuncho 80 bar does not have added cocoa butter, but it's very creamy. J Coco has an 85% cocoa bar, which is amazing, and I know she just won an award at in Seattle or somewhere.
Well, yeah, I mean, given the mathematics of things, the higher the cocoa percentage and the less added ingredients, the less added sugar. Even if you have a low-fat cocoa bean, you have a naturally higher occurring percentage of fat of cocoa butter, and so at some point, you'll find that it becomes a stylistic choice. At what point are you going to start adding cocoa butter? What is it that you're looking for in terms of mouthfeel and release of flavor and things like that? And, for me, that's one of the great things. I mean, finding a cocoa bean that has a naturally occurring 60% fat is pretty remarkable. But what it also says is that, if with proper processing, so you get rid of the bitterness and you get rid of the astringency at any different cocoa fat content, you've got less of the cocoa, what are called the non-fat solids, right? And so there's less stuff there to contribute to bitter flavors or other kinds of flavors. And so the sugar is going to ring through in a way that it might not in another formulation. So what I want to do is very, very quickly, I want to recognize Jose Peralta Guerra. Do you know Jose, Sam? He wants to talk with you. You're both on LinkedIn. Great.
Yeah, I got a message from him today on LinkedIn. So
okay. So obviously, I mean, the two of you, if you're connected on LinkedIn, that's the way to go about doing it. And then the Balus at Cocoa Town says you've transformed Cacaosuyo into something much more than a quote unquote typical chocolate maker. So how do you see the future of Cacaosuyo? And I do want to get to that question. I mean, I'm doing this live. I don't have somebody reading these things for me. And you see when I move my attention, I want to be focused up on here so you can see that I'm paying attention, but I have to do this as well. What I want to do is talk about a couple of things. So the first one of which is, you talked about the early part of what you were doing is focusing on learning about your raw ingredient, learning about the cocoa. At the same time, you're doing some work experimenting with deciding how you're going to produce chocolate. You mentioned the fact that, when I was there, I think visiting the factory for the first time in 2014, you had a mix of equipment. I believe there was a melanger, there might have been a universal. You were using an FBM tempering machine, and you had one of the FBM conchas, a Cligo. But at some point, so you're doing, the traditional bean to bar stuff that, specialty chocolate makers or craft chocolate makers do, is you're working relatively small batches. A lot of the work is being done by hand. But one of the things I think that really distinguished the business operation is that I think from the beginning you had this idea that what you wanted to do is to be able to do larger scale transformation. And so I think that's sort of at the core of the question of not being a typical chocolate maker. So if you go and watch the video, you'll notice that you have an automatic molding and demolding line, right? And other kinds of things. And I don't know how much you've scaled the actual manufacturing part of your process, the conversion of beans, the transformation of beans into chocolate. But walk us, if you can, through the business considerations, because there are a lot of people who've got a successful small business who are looking at examples of scaling up production, right? And there are alternatives for how to do it. One of them would be the way that a company like the Mass Brothers did. Let's just get 20 melangers, right, and employ them in parallel. But then you have people who are going into large ball mills. And from an investment perspective, there's not a whole lot of difference between buying 20 melangers and buying a 100-liter ball mill and a 500-liter conch. So talk us through, from Sam's perspective, how you decided to make chocolate and how you decided to grow.
Well, okay. Basically, we started like most bean to bar with the illusion, let's make a nice packaging. Let's make the best chocolate in the world. And we started with a melanger, with a Cocoa Town machine, and which was the melanger to use. But we also paired that with the FBM Kligo, because we realized that a melanger will only grind and refine, it won't conch. So we added that to from the beginning. So we were designing our flavor through this Kligo. And so we learned what we had to do, because we learned about, chocolate and cacao. So we started having a lot of success. I mean, as far as people talking and raving about our chocolate from the first moment we were at the Paris show, and for many years. But in 2017, that was about 5 years after the foundation, or 4 years after starting to make chocolate, we came to be or not to be. Should we move forward or should we shut down? And this is something that's going to happen to a lot of small chocolate makers, because you don't reach critical mass with small production. So we had to decide: or we invest and grow, or we just leave it here. And
can I jump in and ask a real quick question?
Sure.
Right. So one of the challenges, and when we get done with this part of things, I want to jump into the work you're doing at ICCO. But one of the challenges that I see for the industry, and I'm talking about specialty chocolate, the small 1% or 2% of the industry, is that number one, we don't know how big the industry is, but we also don't know the distribution. How many small makers are processing under 5 tons? How many of them are buying and transforming 5 to 10 tons or anything like that? So at the point 2017 comes in, if you don't mind sharing, can you give this idea of, you came to this point where it was either a go big or go home moment, for want of a better way of characterizing it, a very American way of characterizing it. Can you tell us, how many tons of beans you were processing at that time, if you remember, right? And so that people get a handle, or if you're in the room, you're watching, or at some other point, it's like, oh, you arrived this point at this size.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're probably doing no more than 5 tons in the year. So we're very small. We're insignificant to the cocoa, farmers in general. I mean, if we were buying from 3 different places. So yeah, it was very small. Now we're thinking, we're moving probably about 60 tons, 70 tons, which isn't huge either. It's small amounts. But we're thinking about next year, at least, next 12 months, maybe 100, 150. So it'll depend, because we're growing in a different way. So we've scaled. So obviously we decided, yes, go forward, let's invest and grow. So as we did that in 2018, we moved to a bigger facility, which I don't think you've seen.
No,
right?
I was at the facility in 2017. So the molding line was there, but I don't think it was working yet.
No, it was just sitting there.
Yeah.
So yeah, we moved before we ever got it going. So at that point we were ready to invest. And more, we bought those machines, but we needed to invest more, moving and a lot of stuff. So we ended up moving months later. And yeah, our bottleneck had been molding. We couldn't grow it because, you know, you can only do so much on a small machine. So even though we had a tempering machine, you know, we're doing well with our FBM. We're still small. We're still bean to bar and craft. We are still bean to bar and craft because the craft is not in the size of your molding machine. The craft is in the quality of your products, right? So we think now our growth will be in scaling, you know, the production of chocolate for other people who care about having good quality and, you know, no child slavery and, you know, the things people care about in general. You know, that's why we say that, you know, we're making chocolate now for all of us who care.
So when people move out of melangers, and there's a question I'm going to get to after I get this, before we go into the go. So for people who move out of melangers, who want to move out of melangers when they're scaling, there are basically three approaches technologically. One of would be to use a roll mill, perhaps a 3-roll mill into a 5-roll mill into a conch. Another one would be to use a ball mill into a conch. And with all of the ancillary equipment that's necessary to do that, I'm obviously simplifying things. And the third way would be to go with what's called a universal. How did you decide to scale up your production? Did you buy a fleet of melangers, or did you actually move to an entirely different production technology?
Yeah, we went into the universal because it was we did realize early enough that we needed the contract chocolate to make it, you know, to design it. You need to, you know, you can add temperature, you can add time, and obviously with everything you can add time, but you can aerate, and you can get to do the conching in that machine. So all in one, it's a bit easier. We are making, you know, excellent chocolate. So we started with a small machine. Now we have bigger machines. So yeah, we went that route.
Well, it's a struggle. It's a struggle for a specialty chocolate maker because, you know, part of the ethos is stone on stone, right? And if you want to scale up, you need to move out of, well, you can either buy 20 stone on stone grinders or more, or what you do is you go to a metal on metal. And so at some point, there is this fundamental decision that needs to get made about how you're going to go about doing it. I think that, so one of the things I do want to point out is that it is possible to conch in a melanger. However, melangers are not conches. People who do everything in a melanger are using them as universals. So a pre-refine, grind, refine, and then conching. It's just they're not efficient as conches. Right?
My Cligo worked better than that.
Well, you know, listen, it was designed specifically to do one thing. So I just want to point out that, you know, I have a personal pet peeve, and everybody who's been reading my work on the Chocolate Life, or was at any of my Clubhouse sessions or here on the Chocolate Life Live, I actually did a session about how, you know, melangers are not conscious. It's one of my pet peeves. You know, if you're going to use a melanger, it's a universal, but it was never designed to do that efficiently. It can be done, right? And a lot of people do it, and a lot of people do it very well. But it is a real challenge to, it requires work. And when you have a dedicated machine, which is designed to be a conch, you can do the work that might take you 48 hours in a melanger, any melanger. This is not brand specific. It is just the technology.
No, but
you can do it. You can do it much more effectively.
We could get into different ways. I've done a lot, and obviously in our melanger, and we still use it. But yeah, I mean, I could get into what we do and why one thing could be better enough, but I don't think we're here for that today.
Well, but I think, you know, listen, it is my belief that every one of these makers need to ask and answer this question for themselves. And every single one of them will say, you know, for example, you know, is my brand identity caught up with a particular way of making? If it is, then you're going to continue to make it that way. But what you may decide is that, you know, you do need to grow, and you're going to need to look at very different approaches to growing it. I know people who are very successful at going into universals. Sam, you're one of them. I would think Brian Graham at Fruition, another one. who's moved into universals for a bunch of reasons. And actually, I've been talking to Brian. He's going to be a guest in the future. But I just want to do this because Balu asked the question again. So in addition to just making chocolate, I see you're also backward integrating into post-harvest practices and trying to make an impact on cocoa farming. Are you planning to focus more on that? But what I want to think a little more generally about that, Sam, which is that one of the unique opportunities of being a chocolate maker in a producing country is that you do have an option, you do have, like, the beans are a couple of hours drive away, and in some cases, sometimes, and so if you're bringing them from Amazonas, it's a lot longer away than it might be from Vrije. And I think that this is, one of the unique opportunities which is associated with a chocolate maker in a producing country. The challenge being getting the chocolate out of the country into distribution in other parts of the world. Right.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, that's an advantage being here for sure. Now, Balu asked, we're not backward integrating. We started there. Okay. Our genesis was in learning about that first before we ever made any chocolate. So.
Gotcha. And, and I certainly understand and respect that. Do you find, if you're at 60 metric tons, right, this year for Cacaosuyo, I believe that would make you sort of the largest specialty chocolate maker in Peru, or if not the largest, one of the largest. There are obviously big processing company, Machu Picchu would be one. You have Naranjijo, which is actually doing derivatives mostly. So there are bigger companies, but I think that Cacaosuyo is the largest one. Are there others who I would think of? So I think of Chatel and other companies. Are they as closely integrated with their farmers as you appear to be? Are you driving this kind of awareness among other makers?
I think we started that way, and we've been that way. I can't speak for how they're managing. I know everybody in the business, obviously, but they can probably tell their story better than I can. That was just ours. That's how we started. That's why we're doing it. And I should say that when I talk about so much volume, it's not that Cacaosuyo as a brand is selling those many bars, because when you start to do the math, you're gonna say, wow, these guys are selling a bunch of bars at a premium price. No, we are making chocolate for others.
Okay. No, I was thinking of the entire operation, right? And not just things that you're selling, because one of the things that I think the crisis that you're running into in 2017 is that it's not just a matter of producing bars, but if all you do is produce bars, right, there is a limited market for bars, and there are now at least 2,000 small makers around the world, right, who are making single origin bars, many of them using cacaos which are similar to the ones you are using. Sure. And so differentiation
worldwide. It's the fastest growing market in chocolate, but it's still a niche.
Right. So yeah, it represents maybe 0.5% of last year's harvest in terms of total. When you think of everybody, because the big makers are 200 tons. And there aren't many of those, almost, of the 2,000. So the number of makers is growing just incredibly, but most of them are doing 2, 3, 4. A big one would be 10 tons a year, and so so the impact, especially if what you're doing is each one of these makers is buying, half a ton here and half a ton there and half a ton someplace else. It's very, very difficult to have a huge impact on what you're doing. I think, however, that the messaging, which is the next part of what we're going to get into, the messaging around what they're doing is getting a lot of people to pay attention. And I think it's in that respect, I think it's hitting well above its weight class, punching well above its weight class. But before we go into the next section, where we're going to talk about the work you're doing for ICCO, we have Namim again, who asked the question, and I'm sorry, I didn't get to it right away. Do you think it's wrong to start with ball mills and a conch instead of classic mélangeur? Right? So do you think it's wrong to start with ball mills and conches instead of mélangeurs?
If the question is for me, I don't think it's wrong. Anything is wrong. Start with something, and we've used ball mills at the, I think it was a second batch of chocolate we made, and it was like we went to Paris with that we made at a ball mill, and and people raved about it. So I think it's good to start. I mean, anything. I mean, it might be the way you work. I mean, you find your way to make chocolate, and that's fine.
Yeah. So I would answer the question by saying a couple of things. Number one is I've run into confectioners, right, who hand scoop truffles, right, and then dip them, and they think it's the most efficient and effective way to produce, but that's what they learned in school. And there are other people who say, what you have to do is you have to do shell molding, right, because it's most appropriate. And the other people who say, well, you need to slab your ganaches and then enrobe them. And so neither of those positions is right, neither of them is wrong. A lot of it has to do with what it is that you want to make and what it is that you're going to do. What I can tell you is that if you start off in a melanger, and then what you want to do is you want to move to another production technology, you essentially have to relearn a lot about what you know about chocolate making. So if you're to talk to some specialty chocolate makers in the United States, whether they're from North Carolina or Hawaii or California, to name some locations where 3 of them are, what they will tell you is that working for melangers, for example, in the ball mills, requires rethinking everything about their process, especially if what they're trying to do is they're trying to make a chocolate which resembles the chocolate that earned them the reputation that they have. Okay. And so if you start off in a small universal, perhaps a 25 kilo, 20 liter universal, moving from there into a 100 or 250 or 500 is relatively easy, right? Because you understand how things work. If you start off in a small ball mill, then moving to a much larger ball mill is relatively simple because it's the same process. But moving from a melanger into a ball mill or moving is harder than moving from a melanger, I would think, into a universal. And then 3 roll mills are an entirely different thing in themselves. So if you are not already at scale in production and you have the luxury of being able to choose a production technology and your goal is to scale, then what I would do is I would think about a production technology that makes it easy for you to scale, right? In terms of what it is that you're doing. Because it sounds like you're not stuck on this romantic notion of doing everything stone on stone, right? So at least, importantly, your eyes are open, your brain is open to alternative ways of doing things. The challenge you'll find with a ball mill is that lab scale mills are much more expensive than small melangers. And so the level of investment at startup, both in terms of money and in terms of process knowledge, is greater if you're going to start off with a ball mill. That's what I would say. But there are advantages, right, if you end up scaling up, right, going forward. I know a company that makes a 7.5 kilo lab ball mill with a 7 kilo conch. So in that combination, you could get a 7.5 kilo batch roughly every hour, right? And it requires maintenance. You have to watch things, but 7.5 kilos, 35 kilos a day, that's at least comparable to what you might get out of a 65 liter melanger, right? And the price is going to be a little higher, but not that much higher. So it's a balance of things, and I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way. But it's a really interesting question, Namib, and I'm glad to hear that you're open to those considerations. So just everybody, you're looking at the TheChocolateLife live. You're watching the TheChocolateLife live. As always, you can go to TheChocolateLife.com. Here's the homepage of TheChocolateLife.com right now. There's a calendar page. If you click on the calendar, I maintain a link. So here's today's scheduled, and here is the archive of all the previous rooms. And you can go there, or if you want to, what you can do is you can go straight to the YouTube playlist, and you'll find that here are all of the live streams, including the one we're doing right now. You can see that we're live. So please go there. If you're not already a member, you can click the join link, whether you join as a free member or you join as a paid member to support what it is that I'm doing here. I realize that dollars are often difficult to come across and to spread thinly, but so I understand and appreciate. If you do have that ability. So Sam, in closing today, one of the things, you were here last week, and you mentioned that you were involved doing something at the ICCO and promotion. So can you tell us, I mean, you've gone from this chocolate maker in Peru, and all of a sudden you're in a committee for the Global Organization for Cocoa. What does the committee do? And what do you think the challenges are that face you there?
Okay, so basically, presiding is a working group in the ICCO, International Cocoa Organization, for the generic promotion of cacao. Now, we have only had 2 meetings yet, but I think I'm beginning and what I see how things are shaping, and the way I want to take, direct this into what direction we want to take this into, which is basically how can we promote cacao and chocolate, knowing what's going on in Africa, knowing what's going on with child slavery. That's what it is. And basically, my take on that is be a little bit more radical and be part of the solution. Have the chocolate company be part of the solution. I will discussing this. I don't know what big company is going to commit to being part of our working group, but I know there's going to be one of the big companies is going to be there, whether it's Mars, Hershey's, Caliber, I don't know, someone's going to be there, and it's good, showing their side of the story and what we can do. But I think we can't reasonably think that any of these big companies or executives of these companies don't care. They care. I mean, they don't. I don't think anybody is out there to create, work for child slaves. This is something that's hard for everybody to get rid of. But I think we need to be the big companies and the small companies need to be part of the solution, because I'm reading an article today from the Sydney Morning Herald. I don't know if it came out today, but it was precisely Terry Collinsworth, who's very much involved. He was at your previous event here live in the ChocolateLife with Mickey Mistrati, who has already 3 films or 3 documentaries. The latest one of Chocolate War, which I want to see. I haven't had a chance to see that yet. But, what we are seeing is people want to do something about it, but maybe they don't know how. And we need to find a way to be, like, again, part of the solution and not wait for, social pressure to make us change. Because I see in these people like Terry calling for boycotts. And
I don't see how boycotts work, because ultimately, what's going to happen is that the immediate repercussions are going to be on farmers, right? Sure. So, it's like, so I think it's really interesting about how do you craft a solution, which is going to be a win-win-win for all of the parties. I mean, these are public companies. They are responsible to their shareholders, right? And so whatever it is that is done needs to be responsive to shareholder needs, be responsive to corporate requirements, and also needs to be responsive to small chocolate makers like Cacaosuyo, as well as to the farmers. And if we look at things like, I think it's really interesting for people. I asked my guests to sign in a couple of minutes early, and we talk about some things we'd like to talk about. I mean, this notion of, you're working within this working group, and all the big companies want to talk about the worst forms of child labor, right? And what you try to go is slavery. I mean, there's this cognitive dissonance going on in their head where they at some fundamental level, they don't even want to acknowledge that that's really what's going on. I find that, for people who've been regulars here, this notion around language, like who decides what's fair, right? And all this kind of stuff is just, really, really interesting. And the language we use, informs our beliefs, and our beliefs informs our actions, and our actions have consequences. So we need to be really, really careful about the way we talk about things. And Sam, what I think I'm going to do is I've done, for people who may not be aware, I have got a post on the ChocolateLife. Really, one of the reasons why I like people to join is you can comment on posts, and I'm looking for input. But I have a post which is called Top 5 Ways People Try to Defend Slavery, right? And I think one of the, I did not add the notion of, right, this notion of it's the worst forms of child labor. It's not really slavery. And based on this conversation, I think I'm going to add that in, that we need to be careful about the words we're using, and the notion of like, oh, it's just bad child labor, as opposed to it's slavery. So what's next for Cacaosuyo? I mean, we've got a few seconds left. I think I want to recognize Vivi, thank you for all the information. We'll get it shared one way or another. Not all the comments, for example, on LinkedIn make it to YouTube. Not all the YouTube comments make it to LinkedIn and Facebook. So, I appreciate your sharing things, but we will find a way to put them in the post so they get shared with everybody, not just in the stream comments that are here. And I also want to acknowledge Namim, who says, thanks for the answer. He appreciates new technologies, but I get a lot of negative opinions to my approach. And here's what I would say about that. And it's the way I respond to taste. Don't let anybody take away from you, right? Your decision-making power and your beliefs. What you believe is what you believe. What you like is what you like, right? In the end, what matters, right, is how you treat the people who are making your ingredients, not taking unfair advantage of anybody, which is exploitation in one form or another. And then the chocolate that you make, right? If you hand them a chocolate and you don't tell them about how you make it, and they go, it's good, right? And then they ask you how you make it, and you say, I do it in a ball mill, then you know that there's some prejudice there that has nothing to do with you. It's coming from someplace else. And so take ownership, take pride in what it is that you're doing, and don't let anybody talk you out of what you're doing just because it's the Mac versus PC argument. Oh, you're on Windows? Ha, right. This is, we're 20 years in. This is not where we should be arguing. This is the wrong argument to pick. And
Clay, there's another thing. I was watching one of your other interviews, and you mentioned, how much people put different value on different things. You mentioned whether it be organic, whether it be, fair trade, or everybody puts a different value on certain things. For some people, being organic would probably be weighs more. For us, when we make a chocolate, our chocolate, maybe we don't make the best, creamiest chocolate. I know, and it could be easy. I could add cocoa butter, make it creamier. But our take on chocolate is that we want you to taste the bean. Whether it's less creamy, it's probably because that Pura has less cocoa butter in the bean, and it's more creamy because the Cusco has an amazing amount of cocoa butter. So it's our take. And somebody might say, oh, I like Lindt better because, it's really creamy. Okay, it's everybody's, and I might not say that. It might be just another great brand, that adds cocoa butter because they want to add the creaminess to their experience, and that's fine. So whether you make it in one machine or not, you got to be happy with the product that you get out of it. So there's a lot of discussions, and I've heard a lot of different things, and I was weary about, machines. Maybe I wouldn't show my machines, or anybody see secrets, because I've seen other companies that have secrecy about their machinery. There's always going to be snobs about one thing or the other. Just do what you like. And if it's good, keep at it, improve it.
Right. One of the things I will say is it's very hard to make a 2-ingredient chocolate from a low-fat cocoa bean in a ball mill. I mean, there are some technical constraints also when you're looking at different technologies. And so you need to be aware of those. But Sam, you're absolutely right. We've had this general discussion about what quality means, and quality is a basket of attributes. And in every basket, each one of us has our own set of attributes and different weights about how we value those attributes. Exactly. And so it's really, really important. For some people, this notion of, authenticity, it has to be 2-ingredient, it has to be single origin, no blending whatsoever. We can't blend bags of beans. We can't blend roasts. We can't blend, batches coming out of the melanger. Just everything has to be, I don't want to use the word pristine, but that's the first word that came to mind. We can't do any of that playing around. And so, I think that, owning what it is that you're doing, right, and doing the best you can with what it is that you're doing. And fundamentally, in the end, you put it in people's mouths, and that's either they like it if they don't. I mean, I don't know about you, Sam, but as a performer, you get up there, and some people in the audience will love what you do, and some people will hate what you do, right? And when I was at art school, I mean, one of the first things that you need to learn is you put your stuff up on the wall during a critique, and some people will like it and some people will hate it. And you have to learn very, very quickly that criticisms of your work are not criticisms of you personally. So when people say, I don't like that, this is not a personal affront to you. Well, sometimes they may phrase it as a personal affront, but for the most part, if they're talking straightforwardly, I mean, if they put it in their mouth and I don't like it, all that means is that they don't like it, right? It has nothing to do with you as a person or anything like that. Sure. I think that, what Sam is doing and has done is that he's shown that it is always a poor workman who blames the tools for their failure, right? And so if you have mastered your craft, right? So you understand the technical aspects of your machinery and you know how to use them, you'll be able to produce good work no matter what technique and what production workflow you decide to choose. And so I think, that's a great place to end the show, except a quick note. Rose, who's coming in from Ireland, says she's been importing Cacaosuyo to Ireland since 2017. And her customers are enchanted with it. So Rose, thank you very much. Rose was a regular on the Clubhouse series that I was doing. And so Sam, the other thing is I haven't been to Peru in a couple of years, looking for an excuse. Would you be up to hosting a tour group? Right?
Sure.
Come to Lima. I mean, by the way, man, there's some absolutely amazing food in Lima. I mean, I think it's one of the things that I miss most about being there. And that it's an absolutely beautiful country. Going there, just the geographic diversity is just really, really wonderful. I've never been to Vrine. I've never been down to Cusco. I've been 6 times, and I've always been to Lima and north. I've never been south, so I'm looking forward to it. So I may take you up, and we'll see if we can organize something. Is there a Salon del Cacao y Chocolate this year? Is there going to be one in June?
Yeah, there will be. Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, they're making it international supposedly this year. So we're allowing other Latin American companies to participate.
Oh, cool. Do you know when that is by any chance for people who might be traveling?
It is July.
Okay.
Yeah, July. I don't remember the days, 20 something or.
Okay, because just that there are 3 other festivals in Brazil that month. And I know that Ecuador is in the middle of an emergency lockdown against gang violence in Manabí and Esmeraldas, one other province. And so any festival which might have been scheduled for May or June is going to be pushed to July. July is going to be just a very, very busy month around the world.
For sure, for sure. It's it's 11 from the 11th to the 15th.
The 11th to the 15th of July. Wow. Yep. If it weren't for the fact that I'm supposed to be in Colombia on the 15th, maybe.
That's easy. You'd be close.
Maybe I can. Anyway, Sam, as always, it's been a pleasure. It's been way too long. I'm just really, really happy to see your smiling face. And you're always welcome back. If there's something, I would love to, once you've had a couple of meetings of the working group, I would love to understand a little bit more about what it is that's going on. And I think the people who are here would also like to have a little bit of understanding of what's going on. And so I want to say thank you. I wish you all the success. Looking forward to tasting your new work and seeing what's going on. We've seen each other in New York at the Fancy Food Show. I think the last time would have been 2019.
Could have been.
Yeah, no.
I think it was 2018, in fact. So it's been a while. And I always like to chat. I like to pick your mind because I don't think anybody travels and learns about chocolate so much in so many different countries. You're a pioneer in the blogging of chocolate. ChocolateLife's been around for a while. Yeah. You're the cacao otaku.
Cocoa otaku.
Cocoa otaku. There you go. So, well, it'll be good to see you again, and we can chat a lot. I'm sure we'll learn a lot.
I appreciate that. And I just real quickly, Teresa Grant, who is a regular here, says that July 14th through 17th is the Salon del Cacao y Chocolate in Lima. So, and with that, I'm going to sign off as I always do with saying thank you very much to our very special guest, Sam Giha, Cacaosuyo, down in Lima, Peru. And with that, remember everyone, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong.